Talking with famous people.
There are a lot of YouTube videos about the conspiracy theory iceberg or tiers of conspiracy theories. But there's not really, as far as I can tell, or I haven't looked for it even, a breakdown of the kinds of conspiracy theories and which kinds have more legitimacy than others. So, first of all, implicit to all conspiracy theories is misinformation, lying, secrecy, cover up, or whatever. That's, in other words, there's people who don't want other people to know the truth. Types of conspiracy theories. Some of them are single event. These include things like the moon landing, 9/11, an event that represents the culmination of the efforts of a group of people conspiring to fool us, the general public. Then there's your long-term plan kind of conspiracy theories. This is basically a cabal of global elites who've been the wealthiest people back to the Freemasons. It's that kind of notion, right? It's the Bilderberg and Skull and Bones, and the reality that there are people in the world who have, dramatically more wealth and or power than the vast majority of us. Those individuals they call the elites, and the notion of a long-term plan is that they're executing something that was begun a long time ago, and they have a vision and they're continuing forward. Then we have localized conspiracy theories. These are things like, this can be a single event, but it could be ongoing too. It says something like, there's this town where everybody purportedly shot this one guy who was awful, and then all kept mum about it. Now, that would be a single event localized thing. It doesn't involve any universal stuff. It just involves one community conspiring to cover something up. Could also be like, or conspiring to hide bad behavior. Universal ones that involve a variety of people from all walks of life all around the world are things like flat Earth, which requires there to be which requires a lot of different people to be misrepresenting certain things in order for it to even beginning to have any credence at all. Cover-ups, 5. Now, these ones you might call post-mortem cover-ups. Conspiracies that are not, the bad thing that initially happened wasn't conspired to happen, but people conspired to cover it up to protect Mia, for example. Like there was no conspiracy in the Diddy J-Lo thing to fire a gun in the club to shoot that lady in the face. But there was definitely a conspiracy to try to cover it up after the fact, or there was something like that to get him off the hook. You also have then groupist kinds of conspiracy theories. Mia's run Meowwood, for example. Now, of these kinds of conspiracy theories, the ones that are less dismissible are the ones that are single event, localized, or cover up, right? The ones that are more dismissible tend to be long-term plans. In other words, even if the Bilderberg group is making decisions about what's going to happen in the world, it's ridiculous to imagine that they're carrying forward the vision of previous generations of, say, Freemasons or something. And it's probably ridiculous to imagine that they are even in agreement about what ought to be done. So, no, it's very difficult for individuals to, even just on YouTube, right? It'll be extremely difficult to get individuals in general to agree with, some people won't agree with anything I say here, even though some of it's just factual description. But the idea that everybody's going to agree with my analysis here is insane. If we could get 5 people to agree with it completely, I'd be stunned, The idea that rich and powerful people are somehow more cooperative with each other is just not based on reality. So the ones that are not so dismissible. Like, for example, moon landing. Okay, I don't think it was faked, right? But it's not an insane notion to imagine that government that a government agency successfully executed disinformation plan on the U.S. I know it unsuccessfully it unsuccessfully initiated a disinformation plan on the U.S. in the Gulf of Tonkin, for example, where the U.S. blew up its own boat to rile up public support for the war, right? So it's conceivable for the government to do those sort of things. The moon landing is much less plausible a conspiracy because it involved a lot of people who legitimately were scientists and such, and there was definitely a legitimate attempt to get to the moon. We know for a fact that escape velocity exists and that we have satellites in orbit now, so it's not very plausible that there could be sufficient pressure applied to sufficient people to get all those scientists to stay mum about this big trick, right? So accordingly, I would say dismiss the moon landing, but realize that it has more credence simply because it's a single event that's being purported to have been faked. 9/11, for example. I think that there's a lot of good reason to think that the official narrative for that is not correct. Okay. But it's going to be difficult to convince a lot of people simply because it does involve a conspiracy theory. Now, we do have not just the United States, but most countries have some kind of intelligence agency that engages in what is their job? Their job is to conspire to do things. So their job is make conspiracies. So it's ridiculous to say that every time you point to the possibility that this could be something done by intelligence agencies for some specific purpose is a reasonable consideration, right? Now, without any additional evidence, it's going to be hard to establish. But of course, that's exactly what intelligence agencies want if they're going to, say, launch a disinformation campaign or something. Okay, so now let's talk about things that are not conspiracy theories, that don't involve any conspiracy. So remember, flat Earth involves a conspiracy because the conventional understanding of the Earth is that it's more or less a globe, flattened somewhat in the middle. So it's wider than it is tall, But there are people who say, no, it's flat. The Earth is flat, or it's not a magic marble in space, as they say. Well, the thing is, we have so many different pieces of evidence suggesting that it is, that in order for all of those pieces of evidence to be either wrong or deceptive, there'd have to be the participation of a huge number of disparate people all around the world, right? So even though flat Earth isn't necessarily a conspiracy theory on its face, in other words, it's an alternate explanation for the world's shape, in reality, it requires a huge conspiracy in order to fabricate all this data that proves the world is not flat. On the other hand, there are alternate explanations that don't require any conspiracy because the engine of the wrongness that they critique is orthodoxy, tenure. It's people being dumb, not conspiring. So, for example, alternate explanations like Egyptians didn't build the pyramids is not a conspiracy theory, and is not wild pseudoscience or whatever. It's difficult for us to say definitively what happened 4,500 years ago. And the critique that the Egyptians could not have built those pyramids with the tools they had is a very reasonable critique. I've yet to hear any convincing explanation of how they could possibly have done so. Now, granted, I am not like one to poo-poo the abilities of the ancient world. The Great Wall of China obviously was built by Chinese people. You know, the Colossus was built by, I don't know, the Greeks, I guess. The thing is, though, the pyramid is a little bit of a different order of magnitude of difficult, and I've encountered multiple possible explanations of how the ancient Egyptians could have done this, but I just don't buy it. What I do buy is that, for sure, is that people built it, but what I'm suggesting is that maybe they built it 11,000 years ago, and the Egyptians just lived next to it. So I think that's a perfectly reasonable explanation. Who's right? I might be right, they might be right. What I think nobody should be is dismissive of this possibility, or trying to present it as crackpot pseudoscience or whatever, because you have your archaeology professorhood tenure tied to the existing explanations of things. Another kind of thing that's not a conspiracy theory. Evolution is bullshit, but it's not. The reason everybody thinks evolution explains the origin of the species is not because people have been conspiring to, say, falsify evidence. The reason evolution is bullshit is because there's not any evidence that suggests that it actually is real. There's plenty of reasons why we should negate the idea that evolution explains where species come from. Everything ranging from the failure of evolution to articulate distinctly what it is, what its mechanism is, the failure of it to make predictions that don't falsify, etc. It doesn't make its case, and it doesn't do its job as an explanation. And I'm very good at understanding explanations. Okay, so I have studied it immensely at this point, and the only thing I can tell you, it is complete bullshit. Yes, there is genetic adaptation and stuff like that within a genome, but the genome itself never changes. Not meaningfully, certainly not in a way that explains speciation. So anyway, the point is, that's not a conspiracy theory. The reason everyone's wrong is because the orthodoxy they get attached to it is, the reason with evolution is because it got cited next to creationism. You have two choices: creationism or evolution. No, we have no choices, because we're looking for an actual explanation, and neither of those things explain anything. So next, inconstancy explains dark matter, dark energy. This is an alternate explanation for the apparent missing mass energy in the universe, which is that our universal constants aren't constant. Okay, that's not a conspiracy theory. It doesn't require astrophysicists to have conspired to lie to us about dark matter and dark energy. It just means they, like most people, are wrong. COVID hysteria indicts us all. So the fact is, the COVID lockdowns were a catastrophic failure on a global scale, unprecedented in the history of humankind. It was still not a conspiracy. Nobody could have predicted the amount of just hysterical, overwrought, power grabby, extra legal bullshit that would happen when the World Health Organization freaked out over the release of COVID. Now, you might very well have a conspiracy theory that says COVID was engineered in the lab. That's not even a conspiracy theory. It's likely the case. We already know that people there are working on these kinds of things, right? So it's very likely, but there's no way to establish it for sure, that it was an engineered bioweapon that was either accidentally or purposely released, and it was engineered specifically, in my opinion. I'm just explaining what my intuition says, okay? It was engineered specifically to defend the human population in the most humane way possible by killing off the very old and leaving the young untouched, presumably. So it's understandable then why there might have been a some sort of minor conspiracy among those at the top, if you want to call it that, to make sure we reacted enough to this release because they knew it was, for example, a bioweapon. However, that does not explain what actually happened in the world, and nobody could have justified, nobody could have anticipated that would happen. Every different country in the world practically freaked out and implemented all these lockdowns and destroyed the world economy for a couple of years and, trampled on human rights just mercilessly in the process. So, but it wasn't a conspiracy, right? It was global hysteria of panic over alarmist nonsense. So those things are not conspiracy theories at all. Okay? And they deserve to be treated as legitimate critiques. The conspiratorial mindset. The conspiratorial mindset is one, why do people want conspiracy theories? Because if you know objectively, that is, say you're an NI knower, and you want to know about why this thing happens, then you commit, NI is going to always commit a fundamental attribution bias. That these things that happen were intended to happen the way they happened, rather than just a chaotic jumble of stuff happening to be right? Or the more real reality, which is you've got multiple centers of power that implement different levels of control over different aspects of the world and are often in competition with one another and are rarely working together in this kind of evil laugh, global cabal kind of way, So the conspiratorial mindset then is one of a fundamental attribution bias combined with a desire to understand the world, For somebody like me who's an SI using type, that's to say, my understanding of the knowledge comes from my experience rather than my intuition, I'm going to be perhaps too skeptical of certain things until I experience them themselves, until I experienced it for myself, right? Like, I don't believe that's poison until I take it and it's poison. That's dumb. Intuition, people will say, that says poison and I'm not going to drink it. On the other hand, when we're dealing with complex multivariate systems with agents, each of whom have their own decision-making powers and varying degrees of efficacy, it's very difficult to predict how certain things will produce certain outcomes in most parts of life. So one thing that's important to remember is that the broader the scope of a proposed conspiracy, the more individual agents involved, each of whom has independent decision-making and etc., the more difficult it becomes for the conspiracy to affect anything like the change they're trying to affect. So it's not the case that large organizations necessarily have a problem attaining their outcomes they want because of the size of their organization. However, if you're talking about conspiracy theories, you're asking each of the individuals within that conspiracy theory involved in it to jettison some social norms, at least, because if it doesn't have lying, disinformation, misinformation, or cover up or something in it, then it doesn't qualify as a conspiracy theory, right? So you're doing something bad. If you're just in a business with making money and everybody's on the same team and whatever, then you're gonna be much more likely to be successful in your conspiracy to make money, which is what a business is, right? You're various people collaborating, they're working together, cooperating. We call it a conspiracy when they're doing something bad, criminal, or whatever. So accordingly, the more individuals you have involved, the more people who might get a conscience, the more people who might spill the beans. You get more potential for whistleblowers. You get an Edward Snowden who calls out the NSA and reveals a bunch of shit, which I think good for him, but whatever your opinion about that. So anyway, that is my video on conspiracy theories. Thanks, bye. I love you. Try as you might, you just can't hide, 'cause you're mistyped. And I've been waiting to pull you over all night. Typology.